Right, that's better. Sorry, back with you. Okay, so bit of an introduction. This is what we're going to be doing here. I don't know if I've lost you. If you could rejoin, that'd be great. Um, Let me just hold fire a sec. Text Nick. Okay, I'll make a start because I'm not sure whether I've lost some of you or what's gone on really. Technology failing here. So basically, the intent is just to give you a bit of an intro, a little bit about the GSP and the GDP, a bit of a brief history, and then that'll take us up to talk about the Tangier incident, which occurred on the 6th of February 1942. So I'll talk to you a little bit about Tangier before World War II, about Spain during World War II, about the incident itself, the aftermath, and then remembering those that fell. Um, so first of all, a little bit about me. My name's Rob Allen. Those of you who don't know me, I'm a member of the club. Um, I was in the UK Police from '83 through to 2013. Career detective. Basically dealt with mostly acquisitive crime, white collar crime, latterly corruption, fraud, that type of thing. Mainly in the arms trade. In 2009, I was seconded to Gibraltar to take up the job with what was then the GSP. And after a couple of years of that on secondment, um, I retired from the UK and took up the job here locally as the chief of police. So that's me. A little bit about the GDP then. So, formed in 1938, the Gibraltar Security Police, and the role was to take care of the installations in the Upper Rock, various sensitive installations in the Upper Rock, and they created a very small police force to deal with that, mainly to do with security, access, and stuff. Um, and then what happened was the war broke out and the force took on a much wider role. It expanded significantly in terms of numbers and it took on a much bigger role in Gibraltar. It was responsible for access into Gibraltar, checking people coming across the border, came under the Defence Security Officer, and basically ended up in all sort of facets of police work, counter espionage, and so on during the war. And in fact, then that led right up to the end of the war, and then the GSP, as was, retreated back up the rock again. Policia del Monte went back up until 1982, when, with the opening of the border, it was decided to change the name of the force because Gibraltar Security Police sounded a little bit like sort of apartheid, a little bit like forces around the world that were political forces. So they wanted to soften the name, responsible for service establishments within Gibraltar. So they changed it to Gibraltar Services Police. When I came out in 2009, we changed the name again to better reflect what the force does. So it's in Gibraltar, it's working for defence and a police force. So that's why it's the Gibraltar Defence Police. So that's a brief history of that. Today, I've got about 150 people, of which 95 are police officers. We're operationally independent of the MOD. I report to a board as the chief officer. We have a mandate basically to enable the MOD mission in Gibraltar, which means that we do some sort of harder edge stuff, the protective services, firearms, marine, dogs, and the tricky bit is doing all of that to a UK standard, which is easier said than done for a very small force such as this one. We work very close with the RGP and other law enforcement, and we enjoy a very good working relationship with the RGP, and increasingly working closer and closer together. And part of our remit is to contribute to the overall security of Gibraltar, but we're wholly funded by the MOD, albeit locally raised and operating under Gibraltar law, but funded by the UK. So this is the Gibraltar Security Police as was. This is during the war. You've got the upper rock there, as you see, officers there on the frontier. And then that's a very famous picture there. The picture of the police officer coming down the steps there. That is a guy called Cordon Cuenca, who was the one of the spies, Spanish spies that were arrested attempting to blow up the naval base. And the chap who's the police officer there is a guy called Adamson, who was my predecessor, the first superintendent in charge of the force. And these guys were ultimately the last to be hung in Gibraltar by the famous Albert Pierpoint, the hangman from the UK. So that was the role during the war. So that brings us up to during the war. This is a picture of the force as it was in 1940, and sadly, as we'll see, several of these were to be killed a couple of years later. So our story begins really, and for me, this is how the story begins. This plaque, picture is not a great picture, but this brass plaque hangs in my headquarters, and it tells of an explosion in Tangier, which killed 4 officers. And we typically commemorate on Remembrance Day in Tangier, and I was interested to try and find out a little bit more. So what happened was I started researching this and started looking. There were various sort of garbled accounts of what had happened during the Second World War and how these officers had come to lose their lives. I started researching and trying to find out what had happened, and that took me to the archives at Kew in London. And anytime I found myself in London, I'd go and go through there, and I picked out files and had a read through. And I was assisted latterly by Brian Reyes from the Chronicle. He was interested, and he and I did some research and found out exactly what had happened, or what we believe happened. What it seems is that basically these 4 officers had kind of unwittingly found themselves in the middle of a clandestine plan, which it designed to weaken the German war effort. And when it all went wrong, they paid with their lives. So what's happening in Tangier? So we're in just before the war, back in 1923, I think. Tangier ultimately, although it comes under the Sultanate of Morocco, it's actually an international zone, and it's administered by Spain, France, and the United Kingdom. And it's very much a free port. And then what happens is on the 14th of June 1940, on the same day that Paris falls, Spanish troops occupy Tangier, and ostensibly still international and neutral. It's very much a hotbed of spies and intrigue. And really, if you watch the film Casablanca, you'll see that actually, in reality, it was very much based on Tangier during the war. That idea of Allied and Axis people all in each other's worlds, in each other's little orbits there, in bars and so on. The British weren't happy that the Spanish had taken over, but they had no real troops available, and they achieved an agreement from Spain that Spain wouldn't fortify Tangier and they would allow unfettered access to British interests, which included the Gazette there, the post office, and so on. But at the same time as all this is going on in Tangier, so Tangier is now under Spain, ostensibly neutral. There's competing demands now. You've got competing demands and disagreements within the British camp. You've got tension picking up. You've got the Special Operations Executive, which had been set up by Churchill, which wasn't particularly popular with other parts of the establishment, with MI5, MI6, Foreign Office. The British ambassador in Madrid at the time is a guy called Sir Samuel Hoare. Now, he had been the Foreign Secretary in the United Kingdom and the Secretary for Air and the Home Secretary. So he was a very senior guy, but he was seen as an appeaser. And so when Neville Chamberlain was thrown out following the whole appeasement thing, he found himself as the ambassador in Madrid. So he wasn't particularly well regarded, but he was also trying to. Part of his remit was to very much to keep Spain out of the war. Churchill feared that if Spain entered the war, then Gibraltar would be lost, and so is really keen not to upset the Spanish. For the SOE, the Special Operations Executive, you can see these tensions, but everything, it was really important and nothing could be traced. No subversive work could be traced back to the British. So bringing us up towards the time now of our incident, which was in February 42. First of all, in January 42, there's an explosion that occurs in a clifftop house in Tangier, overlooking the strait there. It destroys this house, causing it to slide down the hillside. The house is actually believed to be used by spies as a signal station, tracking activity in the strait. And information that's now been obtained from the files reveals that the quantity of explosives and detonators used to cause the explosion attributed to SOE, and the numbers and everything of explosives are critical, and I'll come on to that in a minute. So later, the credit for this operation goes to a guy called Edward Wharton Tiger. Now, if you're going to name a spy, you want to call him Edward Wharton Tiger, because that is the real spy's name. So everything's played down at the time. The British deny all knowledge of this explosion that's knocked out this house that they believe is signal station. No one wants to make a big deal of it because they don't want to let on that they knew what the house was being used for, and so on. Also, it was played down for the ambassador's benefit because he's up there and not too keen. So we've got all of this going on. You've got this backdrop of spies. You've got all of this going on. The tensions between Hoare and Churchill. There's Edward Wharton Tiger there. He's the chap that got a very interesting life, that guy. And that brings us up to the 5th of February 1942. And on that day, a cable is received from the SOE office in Gibraltar, received from this guy called Hugh Quennell in Tangier. He's our man in Tangier, if you like, and he asks for, he needs 12 railway detonators, he needs 6 limpet mines and some other unspecified toys, it says in the signal. So on the 6th of February, 1942, the Royal Engineers Special Section in Gibraltar pack up these items and they address them to Wharton Tiger in Tangier. Then they wrap them further and they address them to the consul in Tangier and they put them in the diplomatic baggage. And what happens is the diplomatic bags are to be escorted by some GSP officers. There's a couple of things going on. In addition to the work that the GSP are doing for things like this, escorting and so on, they're also providing armed protection at the consulate in Tangier. So they give this baggage to the GSP officers, Sergeant Henning, Constable Atias there. and a further guy, Constable Curtis, is travel with them to relieve his colleague at the consulate in Tangier. And at about 5:30 in the afternoon of Friday the 6th of February, the Bland vessel SS Rescue arrives in the port of Tangier. And this used to ply it backwards and forwards between Gibraltar and Tangier. Now, as you imagine, there'd been evacuation. There was a lot of Gibraltarians in Tangier at the time, so people come down to meet the vessel. There's a huge number of people on the quayside. Locals are pushing hand barrows down to the ship to offload the baggage. Taxis are waiting to take the passengers away, and this diplomatic baggage has not been the explosives have not been particularly well packed. Probably in a bit of a rush. The most likely explanation for what happens next is that there was a bit of rough handling of the baggage containing the explosives, or that they were put on the quayside, which was wet, and that caused these explosives to detonate. And the result is carnage, really. What happens is right alongside there, on the quayside in Tangier, one of those taxis is blown over. Another provides a bit of protection for some people, but numerous people are now dead and injured, including our 4 GSP officers, Sergeant Henning, PC Curtis, PC McKillop, and PC Atias. There's another guy from the Gibraltar Police, now the Royal Gibraltar Police, a guy called Stanley Flower. He's seriously injured. He's got serious leg injuries, but he's protected actually because he's behind that taxi. Several others are killed, another Gibraltarian, Mr. Eduardo Pito, and numerous are injured. In the aftermath of the explosion, all that can be seen is a load of anti-German propaganda blowing around on the quayside, because within the baggage, in addition to the explosives, is all this propaganda stuff. Through the silence, and the smoke, you can imagine these leaflets fluttering to the ground. Absolute carnage. Local ambulances struggling to cope. And on the quayside, so you've got various people now on the quayside, death and destruction. But if there's one thing you've got all of these people, you've got Axis people, Allied people, and so on, all of that. If there's confusion on the quayside, imagine what it's like in Gibraltar. Back in Gibraltar, the governor had no idea what had happened. He had no idea of what was in his baggage, to be honest. So everybody's blaming everybody else. The Allies and the Axis powers are now blaming each other. The governor even writes, in one of those files, there's a signal from the governor writing to the Foreign Office in London, suggesting that they need to protest in the strongest terms for this outrage perpetrated in neutral Tangier, and then only for the following day to send a grovelling apology, basically acknowledging that the explosives were actually in his diplomatic baggage. So that's what's going on there. And in Tangier, most people don't really have any doubt as to whose fault this is. That night, about 150 locals riot, and they trash everything that's British in Tangier, including the post office. The consulate narrowly avoids being run over due to the deployment of Spanish troops, which stop that. You can see there that this is how it's being reported: scurrilous attack, and so on. So you can imagine by now there's pressure being brought to bear by the ambassador. They're seriously nervous about the prospect of upsetting the Spanish and being drawn into the war. And so this basically marks the end of the assault on the German listening posts along the coast. In fact, it was nearly 2 years before diplomatic protests led to the Spanish actually dismantling those posts. The fact is that and this is discovered by Brian Reyes, there's a thing called the Bodden line, And what was actually happening was the Germans had started installing listening posts all the way along the coast so that they could detect Allied submarines going through the strait. And as I say, these these explosions were all about um, trying to take out those listening posts. So the first one that actually got taken out successfully in January, and then unfortunately this one, it all went tragically wrong. Um, so what happens then? So we're now at a situation where these poor guys have been killed, numerous people injured. Um, in the days that follow, the four police officers are laid to rest in Tangier. PC Atias is buried in the Jewish ceremony, and the other three in the Bubana Catholic cemetery. Later, Sergeant Henning's remains are removed and taken to the small church in St Andrew's Church in the centre of Tangier. For the GSP, the Gibraltar Security Police, less than 4 years in existence at this point, and with only 25 to 30 officers in total, this is absolutely devastating, as you can imagine. Um, the loss of four of their colleagues. Um, For the families, even worse, the impact continued to have an effect through the lives of those left behind, as you'd imagine. Sergeant Henning had previously served in the army, settling in Gibraltar. Probably thought that was his war over. He thought he was safe, probably. His son, 3 years old, never knew his father. For PC Curtis, PC Atias, the same situation for each of their young sons. In fact, just as with every disaster, fate plays a hand because Abraham Atias swapped shifts with another officer called Ernie Pollo, so that Ernie might go on a date with Abraham's sister that night. Were it not for that swap, Albert Pollo, who was our guy in London, you probably know, would never have existed. In relation to PC Stephen McKillop, he too swapped shifts with his older brother Albert, and it's clear that Albert carried survivor's guilt throughout the rest of his life. Um, each year we remember, and I make a point this not this last year, but normally to go to Tangier to remember the officers there, go over with the Royal Navy, and and make a point of remembering and on Remembrance Sunday. And if you've never been to Tangier or you've never been to the church there, it's a very odd, almost quintessential little bit of England in the middle of Tangier there. Uh, that's that. There's a Commonwealth pattern gravestones and so on, which I've got to say, uh, tribute to the expat community in Gibraltar, in Tangier, who keep these graves spotless, really. Um, Bit later on, so in 70 years on, so having done all this research and everything, what we did is we raised a plaque, and that plaque now exists as a remembrance in the Parliament building. And so there, under the Parliament building, there's a big plaque on the wall there. And again, on Armistice Day, we remember those officers. So that pretty much was it. It was all a bit pretty dreadful incident. That was that. Um, and That's us really. So it's a little bit about the GSP into the GDP, a little about what we do now. We're there to protect. We're there to protect and provide security and policing for the MOD and to contribute to Gibraltar. And I think that's about it, really. Don't know if that gave you a little bit of an insight into what happened there. Hope you found that interesting. Thank you. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, that's me. Thank you. Okay. Yeah. I've just realised that I can scroll down, so found that. So Mahesh, relations today. I'm guessing relations in Gibraltar. Um, so we've still got some relations. Constable Curtis, the the granddaughter of Constable Curtis is actually serving with me now. She's a constable in the GDP now. In terms of PC McKillop, it's his nephew is it's over in is McKillop Smith. He's a surveyor over in Cornwall's there. Um, and Atias, his brother, was working in one of the perfume shops there. Sadly, died just at the time when I was researching this. I met with him actually, having gone out and laid the wreath on his brother's grave and everything. I was fortunate enough to meet him just before he died in hospital. So yeah, that was it really. So that's the surviving relatives here. I met some other relatives in the UK, but there we go. That's the story. Let's have a look. So I think that's about it. More than happy, and thank you for joining me tonight. I enjoyed doing that. Hope you found that interesting, and I'll leave it there if I may. Okay, thanks, and thanks very much to the club and particularly to Nick for organising. Okay, all the best then. Bye bye.